Kapoor. Mr. Kapoor is founder director of Alternative Futures, a citizen initiative dedicated to futuristic projects. He has widely published on the interface of science, technology, and society. He has also worked on sustainable development. And he has been a consulting editor of the journal Futures, the Journal of Policy, Planning, and Future Studies. In addition, he is director of the World Futures Studies Federation. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Kapoor to make his presentations.
Thank you so much. This is a small group, and small is beautiful, as you must in the book. Sometimes when I talk to people who grown up in the 90s, in the last decade, even 80s, I'm not sure if sometimes when we talk of E.F. Schumacher, small is beautiful, it draws a blank. But anyway, I hope you're all familiar with that landmark book by E.F. Schumacher. That's very relevant to this whole futures discourse. I will be talking about futures, and it so happens it's also been a very personal journey for me. It's a field, it's a new field, interdisciplinary field in the making, and something with which I have been associated at least from 1994. So I will also be tracing my own personal journey along with how the futures field has grown, and trying to introduce you to what it means. I think it will be a good idea with a very small group to also get an idea. I know that you're all sociology students from different parts of South Asia. We have some faculty members here. It will be a good idea to have a quick run of introductions, and also if you want to comment on what you think this is about, what is this new feature, you can. Please. Maybe you can start from...
Okay, I'll just introduce myself. So, my name is Ankur. I'm assistant professor here from sociology, and I'm interested in post-migration society. I did most of my work in geometry.
Post-migration?
Yes. Most of my work is in geometry. So.
My name is Priya Mehra, and I'm also assistant professor of anthropology. And last semester, I taught a class at SPA, a core class on regional futures. So I'm very curious to see.
Sridhar.
Yeah. Have you lectured in that?
He just called me today morning for the next year.
So I'm very curious to see.
Okay, yes. So good curiosity is very good, very well done. Thank you.
My name is Rahul. I'm from the PhD there in Bucharest. Myself, Rakesh Moore, and I'm a research scholar for India. My name is Mohan. I'm from Nepal. I speak from the University.
Can I please use a bit louder volume since you don't have the benefit of a mic?
Thank you. Manoj Sakar from Nepal. I study cognitive engineering sociology here. I think it is about something about community initiative development in sustainable way.
Myself, Tejas from University of Kashmir. I'm studying sociology.
I'm Soumya from India. I'm Apana. I'm pursuing sociology, master in sociology.
I'm Hitendra Nagaraj, Bangladesh. I completed my graduation from Jawaharlal University, Dhaka.
Abdullah Mahdi from Bangladesh. My graduation was in international relations. Now I'm studying sociology.
Hello sir, I'm Aman from Lucknow, and I'm student of history in my graduation. And now I'm doing sociology just know the society more better.
Okay.
Hello sir, my name is Sunam Thapa. I'm from Nepal. I'm sitting here, student here at Zoology University. Hello everyone, I'm Arpana from India and I did my graduation from economics and I'm pursuing sociology in South University in my second year.
So myself, Nafis, I did my graduation in Chinese. Now I'm pursuing my master's in sociology, and I am very curious about this because I am working on my dissertation on the commodification of emotions. So I really became interested in how the contemporary time is changing and what will happen in future. Thanks.
I have done my graduation from Bangalore. The combination was psychology, economics and sociology. And I'm also interested in looking at your presentation because my topic is dealing with migration. And I want to see the policy things if you cover. Yes.
Hello sir, I'm Ananta. I'm from Delhi. I've pursued my bachelor's in sociology and I'm pursuing a master's in sociology.
Hello sir, this is Amrin. I have done my graduation from JNU and this lecture is important for me because my dissertation topic is I'm looking solar energy as a development discourse. So I want to know about this more about policy thing. Right now I'm reading a book by David Moss on the same anthropology of development. So it's basically dealing with policy
development.
Yeah, policy of development. So
the book is called Cultivating Development.
Cultivating. Yeah. So my interest is to see this how this policy things basically translate into reality and in society. So that's it. Thank you.
I'm Chidanand Basnet. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology. My interest broadly in political sociology. So at some point in my life, I fancied becoming an astrologer. So future studies is naturally very exciting topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that's a great note on which from which we begin on. I thank you all for being here this afternoon. It's a pleasant afternoon. I hope it's not going to be sleepy. So I think this topic is a new area and it very interesting, especially from some of the things that some of the students here have said in terms of the policy implications and all they're interested in. So let me say that this is a field which has been in the making for a few decades now, and it's interesting that it's been more of a intuitive for me. It's been more of an intuitive coming into the field because there are people now who have had formal training in master's courses in future studies for a few decades. Courses have been happening since the 70s. They started in the late 60s. And in India, one does not find much in the higher education sector that is focused in terms of something called future studies. In fact, there are 2 or 3 universities which started with that kind of a course, and some universities which still have it. The University of Madurai has something like it. The University of Kerala has something like it. And at some point, the University of Indore had a program on technology and society. But it's not really sort of taken off as a field in India. Globally, it's growing a lot, but in India, it has not. And interestingly, in the Kerala University, in the Department of the Faculty of the Department of Future Studies, the only real course they offer is on tourism studies. So that's also a comment on how terminologies and things can be distorted. But anyway, I understand there are students there doing MPhil and PhD courses, and perhaps they are more focused on really future studies topics rather than just something like that. So, for me, as I said, why I'm emphasizing my own involvement is that in '94, I was working in Lokayan, and that was if you're familiar with Rajni Kothari's theory of the non-party political process. I mean, again, it used to be talked of more in the 90s, and this decade it seems to have, there's more talk of civil society these days. But nobody now really talks of uses the phrase in terms of non-party political process. But there were high hopes from NGOs and civil society movements during that time. And this was a program of CSDS, which then became an independent organization. And I started with attending a course for young people in Philippines, a short course, a week-long course, supported by UNESCO and organized by the World Future Studies Federation. And that's how my involvement in Future Studies began. And then I was invited to join the World Future Studies Federation. And the role of some scholars at CSDS in India in the future studies field is important. Because this particular organization, which I now coordinate as director of the World Future Studies Federation, it started off in 1967. A lot of action in the futures field took place in the 60s. I'm only historical with how I talk about this because that will give a good see only a few decades in the making. So it will be a good way to introduce how the field is known. In 67, again, some of you may have heard of Johan Galtung. He's an international peace researcher, Norwegian, very old now, but he was very important in the very important work he did in the decades of the 70s and the 80s and so on. In 67, he had a meeting with other scholars. He and other scholars had meetings to consider the formation of this federation. And by 1973, in Paris, the World Future Studies Federation was formed. And Rajni Kothari and Ashish Nandi from CSDS had a role in those meetings, right from the late 60s and early 70s. So we had a link with future studies right from the beginning. And I must say, if any of you are familiar with the journal Alternatives, which is co-published by CSDS, and Dhirubhai Sheth is one of the editors, also is one of the journals which counts in the futures field. But again, journals don't sell too much in India. But it's one of the journals which I believe still comes out. So after that brief introduction in terms of how the Indian involvement was there and how it began in this field, I will just come to a more formal introduction to the field. So it's a new field of inquiry. There's a lot of debate on what to call, in the social sciences there are a lot of terminology critics. So a whole range of names are used. It's called future studies, it's called futures research, it's called futurism, it's called futurology, it's called foresight. In French it's called perspective and so on. But the two most common terms that are used are future studies and futures research. And I want to emphasize the S there in futures. And that's why I also want to mention, I had mentioned to Dave when he got in touch with me that this is the title I want, because the whole question of plural futures and plurality is emphasized very strongly in futures. And that's why in the earlier title I was mentioning an alternative way of doing science, future studies and all. I was not too happy with that, but somehow that was what was mentioned with the invitation. So the S there in terms of the plurality is very important. Even in the World Futures Studies Federation, we emphasize the S. The other thing I want to say is that a lot of quotes and things here I have taken from Wendell Bell, who is a sociologist, professor emeritus at Yale University in the US, who's written these two books called The Foundations of Future Studies, tracing the whole discipline. These are excellent set of two books. And in India, as I mentioned to you before, we do not have much literature available, so recently I was able to get hold of these books and I discovered these. This was the second edition, was brought out in 2003. A lot of the material I have here, acknowledging is from there because he articulates and summarizes a lot of what has been happening in the field. of the books, the number of books and articles on futures is huge. It's estimated, for instance, that in the 3 decades between 17 and 2000, there were 17,000 books and journal articles in the field of future studies. So it's not a very small field too. So in terms of the purposes, I mean, at one level, it's a continuation of an age-old quest to understand what the good life is and what are the values and norms for the good in the society.
The second point we see discover or invent, examine, evaluate, propose possible, probable and preferable futures. Because futurists do work on all these aspects. What is
the problem is what is likely to happen, and a lot of futurist work is also on preferable futures and what ought to be. And now at times this, there's a whole debate about value neutrality. In my time when I studied sociology, there used to be a lot of this debate about whether the social sciences are value neutral. In the future studies, and those debates still take place a lot, even in the field of futures. But largely, because a lot of people in this field are motivated by the threats as they are seen in the next few years, whether they relate to the environment, whether they relate to nuclear war, whether they relate to there is, for instance, a special issue of futures of human extinction scenarios. Because one of the things in futures is also to be able to think the unthinkable, and that's how part of the value of future studies. That's part of where part of the value of future studies lies. So by now, I'll place the history for you in the next part of the talk. Starting in the 30s, and to some extent, for instance, the book by Thomas More, Utopia, Utopian Vision of Society, was written in the 16th century. And similarly, the French author on Jules Verne, I think, the futuristic science fiction novels of the 18th century and the 19th century were also part of what is considered now the futures field. A lot of the science fiction imagination is also considered futures work. So basically, yes, what future studies tries to do is to learn from history, to learn from the past, and then translate this into actionable foresight. So it is in that sense a more, less of a value neutral and more of an action science. It's linked more to, and that's how people like me are also involved in it, because I am not a hardcore academic. I am more of a policy oriented and in some sense an activist kind of a person working in the field, trying to do projects which have immediate policy and action relevance for a lot of people. And that's how my involvement in the field has been for these years. Okay, this is the first time I put it down like this, but normally, internationally I've been interacting with a lot of colleagues in the World Future Studies Federation and so on, so one never needs to, but when I was doing a recap and thinking about my own futures journey, and this was a good time in making this presentation here, I thought that I'll trace some of the ways in which I have been involved. And at the very root of my involvement, I just mentioned the question of being involved in actionable projects, and not many others in future studies, is a deep passion about trying to create a just society for the future. You look at the problems, all kinds of problems, whether it's to do with migration, conflict, war, abject poverty. I mean, after all, we are in a country where almost 300-400 million people live in abject poverty. And I will be talking largely in the context of India, but as you are all familiar, it also in some of them there are great similarities between India and some of the other South Asian countries. There are of course peculiarities, but some of the cultural contexts in particular and some of the socio-economic profiles are quite similar. So I am an intuitive and self-taught futurist. I must mention, I was mentioning to Ankur that, somebody, the IITA has, I explored different libraries and discovered there's very little material on future studies in India. And I discovered some best material that is available in India, is available at the Indian Institute of Public Administration. So that was a library which really helped me get at least some of the text of futures. And then gradually I've collected more as I've gone abroad, or now it's so easy to just order a text and it arrives at your home, to pay that credit card and stuff like that. But so since 94 I've seen it, because since 2001 I was on the WFSL board, since 2008 I have been the director, and since 2003 I have been the consulting editor of Futures. I have really seen the field as maturing in the 90s. And that's how I've seen the field really grow in front of me. Now in 97 I wrote one of my first major papers in Futures. It was called the Techno-Dramas and the Futures of Communication. It's a very substantial paper. And that's in a sense marked my, beyond joining the organization, it marked my, the beginning of, in sense of my journey as a Futures. Then in 2000 I set up with other friends, Alternative Futures. And the whole concept, we decided on this name, and I must mention to you what we mean by that. People keep asking us. We consider 4 key principles of the alternative future towards which we want to strive. And these 4 principles are ecological sustainability, social justice, cultural pluralism, and spirituality. So that's the future we have in mind, and our endeavors in various projects is to work towards that kind of a future. And the other thing is that we set this group up because right from college days in the 80s and the 90s, I was sick of hearing the development critique. And even today you can hear the development critique. So beyond a point, it started reminding me of Rahul Gandhi's speeches. He always used to say, "Hame dekhna hai, hum dekhenge." So, in the development critique also can, beyond a point, you want to move beyond critique and to what are the alternatives, what are the options, where do you go from here? And for instance, I was involved with friends, or my friends were involved in the Narmada Bachao Andolon, which was very significant, and it led World Bank to introduce social audit and things like that. And I always used to tell them that you oppose the project, yes, but you also come up with an alternative. And indeed, they did try it in some form. Some of the people, Rahul Ram, who some of you might now know as the Indian Ocean singer, was a key player in the Narmada Bachao Andolon, and his wife, ex-wife, who is now doing economic growth. And they brought out a booklet called Alternative to the Sardar Sarovar Dam. So there were real concrete efforts also towards alternatives, and that was the model we had. But we really need to think of alternatives, not just going beyond the development critique. The typical example, of course, I have is the use of an air-conditioned room. If you want to criticize, if you want to be part of the environment movement, please suggest alternatives, because very few people are able to, either in their own lives or in terms of policy alternatives, suggest their alternatives. Now, of course, we have the renewable energy movement is growing in a big way, and the whole question of sustainability, renewable energy efficiency, and alternatives for the post-industrial society, a lot of this work, a huge amount of this work has been done all over the world, and a lot of that work is also involved people we identify as futurists and working in the futures field. So, in 2004, I had occasion to bring out a special issue of Futures on Indian Futures, which was incidentally the first country issue brought out by Futures on Indian country. And I also mentioned that we are now doing, in 2012, I am now putting together a second issue on the future of the Indian economy, because at this stage there is greater interest in the Indian economy, and people are interested in it, and everybody is aware of the, I would say, again, unanticipated rise of China and India and some of the other emerging countries. In the 80s, when we lived through the reality in India, I would have never imagined that in 2010 this is where the economy will be. And if you are familiar with some of the projections, I have some copies of the powerful papers which you can collect. Some of the projections about the Indian economy, they are also quite amazing and not obvious knowledge. So names of alternate futures, I may also say that I always used to tell people that in India we only understand development, we don't understand future work as such. So we do development and sustainable development work and so on in terms of our projects. But in terms of our perspective, we are very futuristic. So in 2006, our chairperson, Mr. Katpalia, and I, we published this book on charting a new course, a strategy for sustainable management in India's water resources. So this was, applying futures to a particular field. And we've done this subsequently for looking at inclusive financial growth and the whole role of natural resources and skills and the model of organization. We worked on those issues also. And in 2008, I became being a board member for 2 terms and became the director of the World Futures Administration. So, this was both to introduce to you how my involvement has been in the field and how the field itself is also grown. So, what are some of the basic futurist beliefs? So, what are the attributes of the characteristics of the futurist? And I have a number of people have written about these issues. I read as compiled a longer list, and I've just picked up some of the points from there. Sometimes we say that in India, the 2 reasons why, and again that may apply also to South Asia to some extent, and to some extent to astrology that interested me at some point, is that sometimes people in India can be fatalistic. You must have heard in your interaction with the ordinary public that samupar wala kehta hai, bhagwan ke haath mein hai, and so those notions I do think influence some of the less proactive attitudes towards futures working. And I think that's a hunch. The other hunch is that it's interesting that because we are a very old civilization going back to 5,000 or 6,000 years, our focus is always tends to be on the past and the golden past and so on in this. But of course, this is in practice changing fast, but in terms of policy or research work or recognizing the theoretical base of future studies, not much is happening in India. Or recognizing the importance of future studies in the higher education sector or in the whole education field, it's not happening too much. So, futurists have faith in the use of knowledge in policy formulation and implementation. I'll give you some very pragmatic examples. Civil society in India, which NGOs and all have been very involved with a lot, sometimes they do a meeting and you will get a notice of the meeting after the meeting has been held. So this is the attitude sometimes that you can find in Indian society. Maybe we are improved with the new information technologies. In the West, sometimes they will inform you 1 year in advance of an important meeting or a so that's what shows the difference in attitudes towards planning and time scales. It's just an interesting comment, it's a side comment. So there is a shared set of assumptions. There are a number of assumptions, including the reversibility of time. At this point, there are no future facts, but there are justified conjectures. See, there is a whole debate on whether future studies is more of a science or it's an art. And most scholars tend to think that it is both. Because there are, in future studies, there are a large number of facts, the images that people have of the future, the beliefs they have of the future. Of course, what has happened in the past are definitely facts and there are extrapolations and so on that are done. But even in terms of very factual, recent conjectures on what is going to happen. And that is where I'll come to the point about how the whole attitude. Often when I meet people in India, I say I'm a futurist and I'm not an astrologer. Because the whole difference of it being a more scientific field has to be very, very strongly emphasized. Because in astrology and sometimes the associated, sometimes we have Godwin, the workings of predictions, all kind of irrational ways of dealing with problems. And I'm not even dismissive of astrology as having some importance. But we are only saying it is not a science. In future studies, we use all the methods of science. We look at facts, we look at extrapolations, we do scientific studies, we do, for example, the most famous, I'll come to it later, a very important book which according to me marks the landmark, the founding of the field in public imagination, was a report called The Limits to Growth. Again, I'm not sure if people here have heard of it. This came out in the 1972 by the Club of Rome. This was a time when in 73 the oil shock, the sudden increase in the petrol prices took place, and people had just started the environmental critique of the feminist critique from the 60s was just starting. And in 72, this very interesting report called The Limits to Growth, which sold 9 million copies in 29 languages all over the world. So it was really a report which the sort of coming of the iron of the field. And this used computer simulations and modeling. It was entirely based on computer simulations. And there have been a lot of revisions and critiques and replies from that debate, the limits to the debate. And you can see some of the other assumptions that I mentioned. There are shared methods. There's a separate slide I have on some of the methods that are used. Now, it is one of the things that really marks this field, which is really a transdisciplinary field. So you can have a futures meeting in which you have physicists and mathematicians and social scientists and educationalists and artists all together. And most of these people have a very holistic perspective towards the future and a very strong concern with the social implications of scientific and technological change. And that's where, interestingly, it needs to be stated that the link of sociology as such with the whole futures field is very, very strong. And when I come to the history and origins and mention to you some of the people who have been working in this field, you realize that a lot of people who come from a background in sociology. I mentioned this gentleman who has written the Foundations of Future Studies book. He has been a practicing sociologist, a sociologist on the faculty of Yale for decades. And in 1971, he wrote a book with some of his colleagues called The Sociology of the Future. That was one of the first books which he cited there. The courses by that name started with, I think Alvin Toffler did the first course called The Sociology of the Future in 1966 at New School of Social Research in New York. So it's a field very strongly related to sociology and the whole social sciences field. And even when the physicists and the chemists and the natural scientists come into the field, because the assumptions and beliefs and the images of the future are social facts, and how these influence people's perceptions and people's behavior towards the future are social facts. So that's why social sciences are very strongly in center. Some of the concepts that are used in the field of future studies, future shock was popularized by Alvin Toffler's book by that name. Alternative futures is again emphasizes the plurality. I've talked about possible, probable, and preferable futures. Post-industrial society is a term, I don't know again. Have you heard of this book by Daniel Bell? How many of you here have heard of this book? Called Post-Industrial Society by Daniel Bell. You have. Okay, so good. So, I mean, in the sense that when I was doing sociology in the early 80s and mid 80s, this was quite an important book. And this book has come out of Daniel Bell, was one of the sociologists who has been a futurist. And in the US, there has been a tradition right from the 30s, again from the slides down, I mentioned those details, of setting up commissions. This was a commission set up by the US Academy of Arts and Sciences, and Daniel Bell was the chair of this commission. It was in the 60s, mid-60s, and out of that came a number of books, including Daniel Bell's Post-Industrial Society. And now Post-Industrial Society is one of the key concepts because the whole West, after facing along with the environmental critique of the 80s and so on, after facing the perils and the problems of the Industrial Society, they all take the whole notion of Post-Industrial Society for granted. It's not so much the case in emerging nations and developing nations like India and so on. In the West, this is one of those futures. Sustainable development is such a term which is used to the point of being accurate and becoming efficient. Self-altering prophecy is also one of the things that is discussed in the social sciences. Trends, social trends. One of the books after Toffler and all, which also became, there are some books which we say fall in the category of the pop futures. They became very popular. So one such book was called Megatrends, and then Megatrends 2 by John Naisbitt. By serious scholars, these works are criticized, but these were very important in the whole popularization of the futures field. and then scenarios and visions of the future. And I think this, I put that in a separate color because scenarios and visions of the future are really very central and critical to the whole future. The different methods also often culminate in different scenarios. And I mentioned to you my paper in 97, and there I had done 2 scenarios of the world in 2000, 2 alternative scenarios. And so this, similarly in terms of the practical futures work, among people who work as action futurists, visions of the future, or people who work just to transform society. They are really futurists who are doing it, but they may not call themselves futurists. And we can discuss many examples later in the discussion. Are really people with a vision. So the whole vision of having a different future, even at a personal level. And there is, for instance, somebody in the US who works specifically in the field of personal futures. He talks to and advises people on their own futures. And you have a vision of the future that this is where I will be, and then you tend to reach towards those goals. And the same applies to nations, the same applies to societies. Increasingly, the field of regional geography, the same is applying, is happening a lot with cities and towns. In the developed nations in Scandinavia, Europe and US, more and more people are sort of getting into consultations on how they want the future of the region. A very interesting comment on this is that the US has been sort of not having a clear stand on the whole question of climate change and not signing the Kyoto Protocol. But many cities in the US decided that we will support the Kyoto Protocol and we will work for the changes required for the Kyoto Protocol in terms of our own policy and lifestyle changes. So now I'll just briefly, I want to give you some of the basic concepts and introduction to the field. Oh, I see that it's already 35 minutes, so can we extend this by another 10 minutes? And please do note your questions and all which we sort of have. I'd like to have a good interactive discussion later. So, in terms of the real beginning, H.G. Wells, famous for the time machine, in 19, right at the beginning of the 20th century, he wrote this piece, Humanizing. So, this was, and then in 1932, he proposed the science of the future, actually, and Professor of Ocean, way back in 1932. Sometimes, as I said, I'm really surprised because people even in the sustainable development field, environmentalists, social scientists, sometimes things, landmark things which have been published in the 70s and 80s. And I really want to share this comment. I'm not aware of things which have been published. So somewhere, the intellectual legacy of publications is not really respected, and which is why I really also want to mention these things. The American sociologist, he was a sociologist, William Hoffman, he headed the US president, Albert Hoover's President's Research Committee on Social Trends in 1929. So that was one of the first commissions. And he is considered the father of society and technology studies. He was the first president of the Society for Study of Technology. In 1945, you again might have heard of something called the RAND Corporation, which is one of the most famous think tanks all over the world. Very large presence, does a lot of work with the military and the other sectors of the US even today. And now it has branches in Europe and other countries also. So it was started in 1945. The name came from research and development. The N there also should be in caps. So it was RAND. That's how the name became RAND Corporation. And it has been, it is said that hundreds of staffers of the RAND Corporation were advising different departments of the US government in the 80s and the 90s. Now, 1960s was when the sort of field, those were the early beginnings, really emerged. And 60s was a great period of the world, student movement. 68, I understand, was really a period of great ferment. And I mentioned to you Daniel Bell's book, the American Academy of Arts. And this was not set up by the government, this was set up by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences as a response to the social ferment happening in the US and other countries in the 60s. 64, this French author who wrote in French, this was subsequently, a few years later, it was published in English, The Art of Conjecture. This is a very important book that marked the future field. And then, of course, Alvin Toffler's Future Shock, which was available at all the bookstores. I don't see it now. But when I was growing up in college, you could see any bookstore, you could ask for Alvin Toffler by name and then pick it up. And then subsequently his other books, some of which he co-authored with his wife, A.D. Toffler, called The Third Wave and so on. They were remarkable books, and I must say that these books have a big role in my own learning and thinking in the futures field. And so I mentioned those courses in 66 and 67. Here I want to mention that today, two of the most prominent centers doing higher education master's program in futures. One is the University of Houston, Clear Lake in Texas, in the US. And the other is the University of Hawaii at Manoa, in Hawaii, in the US, where James Daker is based, who did one of the first courses in 1967. And I will not be from personal knowledge or interaction with futurists. Almost a third to half of the futurists practicing today have come out from these two institutions. I mean, maybe that's an exaggeration, but I haven't met people from all over the world. I've met primarily people who are members of the Federation and some other forums, and many of them have come from these two institutions. So then I mentioned to you earlier about the World Future Studies Federation, which came into being in 1973 after meetings at the last point, the bottommost point. And then the Club of Rome, which was, Club of Rome and the limits to growth. These were really the most important things which brought futures into the public perception. And how did I come to know of it, for instance? I was a graduate in the early 80s, and the Indian magazine Seminar, and along with Rajni Kothari and Ashish Modi, Ramesh Thapar, who was the founder and editor of Seminar, was also involved in these efforts. And Seminar brought out an issue, I don't remember the exact year, but somewhere in the early 80s. So, and in my personal journey, reading that single issue of Seminar on limits to growth was one of the most remarkable things. Because it also, as I said, I'm an intuitive futurist because it also matched with a lot of my own thinking. So I said this was great. And after that, I have been a faithful follower of Seminar. I have issues right from the 80s to this day. And the World Future Society, there is an interesting body. America is a capitalist society. There is a commercial organization who was very successful in its membership. They had at one point 60,000 members in the US. It's not so big now, but it brings out also a magazine for the futurism. It's more the pop futurism variety. And also, World Future Society has more members from the US. They talk of technology futures and corporate futures and the whole future as fantasy. I have a paper called Future as Fantasy. And the WFSL is more multicultural. Has more members from all over the world. Although we now are in the process of doing something to get more members from more parts of the world, including the rising emission fees and stuff like that. The present scenario, and we are close to finishing this, just a few more slides. There are some universities, about 2,000 universities, which have full-fledged master's courses. And they are all over the world. They are in Europe, they are in South Africa, they are in the US. Interestingly, this university in Taiwan, it has a mandatory futures course, one particular course for every undergraduate student. It's quite an amazing. It's the only university in the world which has this mandatory course. Then on the WFSI website, that's the link if you want to see the list of futures courses. And then there are other colleges and universities which don't have full-fledged master's courses, but has an individual paper or course within different master's program in political science or economics. A lot of the business administration departments have these courses. And more are trying to set up these courses. There are hundreds of future studies, hundreds, I mean there may be 400, 500, 600, because small and big consultancy organizations and some of the bigger well-known think tanks. And another thing is, a lot of the futures work is done in-house by a number of corporations and companies. Motorola has a big department, and a lot of the other corporations have big departments, and their work is not always shared in public. So there are a lot of futures projection on the process work that is being done. The Millennium Project in the USA has been working now for started in the late 90s, I think, and we were also associated with their values for some time. And they have something called the State of the Future Index. They bring out annually a State of the Future report, which is one of the more prominent publications which now comes out every year. There is now also
set up more recently about sometime in the last decade, maybe about 10 years ago, the Association of Professional Futurists. The European Foresight platform was just brought over as a project that we continue to start from. The European Union funded a huge program under which more than 300 studies of futures, different sectors, whether it's nanotechnology, whether it's a particular industry in a particular country, or whether it's a particular country, a lot of these future studies have been done and shared. And we have also shared two of our studies recently with members of this platform. Now, what are some of the methods? Some of the methods are quite similar to some of the methods that are used in other social sciences. Pragmatic prediction based on correlation of variables, there is quite a common that is done in the other social sciences. Extrapolation is another simpler method. Survey research. The Delphi method is something that the Rand Corporation, people at the Rand Corporation started in the 40s, that I mentioned earlier. They invented and it's been refined. And today, basically what it involves is that on a particular topic, a questionnaire is drawn up. A number of panelists are chosen, their responses are taken, and then results, tentative results are drawn up. And then again those results are shared with those panelists, and then those results are refined based on this. And interestingly, with the modern, I have participated in some of these studies. In some of the modern studies, it's all done instantaneously. You give your own comments or ratings, and immediately, online, the results are shared with you, and then you also given feedback. So and a lot of the European and US really high-tech work for corporations and all is done through this technique. And simulation and computer modeling is quite critical, and some people feel that it's going to grow more and more importance of technology. Gaming is similar, although I should say personally that I do not know how it works because I've not been involved in such exercises myself. Content analysis, and in Europe, for instance, with the European Foresight platform, I saw, and also with some of the UNESCO has a futures division, and it supports some futures work. And they are emphasizing more and more, more democratic futures research. I mentioned to you regional geography earlier. More and more in smaller regions, what is the future that people want for their own cities, for their own regions. So there's more and more public stakeholder participation happening. In India, it happens in a different way through these public hearings and so on, but not in this form. Large number of books are available, the 2 volumes by Mendel Bell. I mentioned Foundations of Future Studies. Then there is a online database of the knowledge base of future studies, edited by one of the key futurists of the last 2 decades. He was the president of the World Future Studies Federation about a decade ago, and he has a number of remarkable works to his credit. So he has about, he has put together under 4 or 5 teams about 300, 400 articles and so on under the knowledge base of future studies. And Future Shock and the Third Wave by Topper I mentioned. Preparing for the 21st Century by Paul Kennedy was a major work which came out in the 90s, and so more of you may have heard of it. And then there are works by a lot of other dissenting or alternate visions. Georg Sadar was the editor of Futures for more than a decade, from almost 2000 to 2011. Now somebody else is doing it. He has a number of works. So this is journals. I just want you to quickly read this. The range of work that Journal Futures wants to do is quite amazing. It looks at the medium and long-term futures of cultures and societies, science and technology, economics and politics, environment and the planet, and individuals and the planet. And covering methods and practices of future studies, it seeks to examine possible and alternative futures of all human endeavors. So the range is quite amazing. Actually, people also say that, for instance, even in history or the other social sciences, there are specializations. In history, people can specialize in the history of different regions or different periods, ancient, medieval, modern, and so on. So the field is very broad, but there can be within that specialists specializing on specific fields. Journal of Future Studies, which is brought out by the Tamkang University in Taiwan. This is interesting because futures is expensive to access. It's a very expensive journal. It's not open access. And in the modern setup, you're probably aware, they say that you can make it open access, but to make it open access, the contributing author has to pay some money. So this is increasing the model how some of these
publishing companies want to make themselves profitable. And but Journal of Future Studies is fully open access, and one of the editors of that is Suhail Ayatullah, who also is of Pakistani origin but now lives in Australia, and who did his work on the theory of crowd and Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar. Notorious in India for other reasons, but also it has a certain academic value which the Anand Paul, I don't know if you have heard of the Anand Paul. And so he worked on that, but he's one of the more important futurists today, and he's one of the co-editors of this journal. Technological forecasting and social change, I'm not sure if this has shut down now or still comes out. Foresight, Future Survey. So these are, I also mentioned to you, alternatives which has an Indian connection. In terms of national foresight efforts, this example is very interesting. You're all aware of the 9/11 attack on the US. It's very interesting that this committee, which worked from 1999 to 2001, February 2001, it gave its last report, and it mentioned and gave very strong recommendations that America needs to do something more about its homeland security. You see that quote, America will become increasingly vulnerable to hostile attack on our homeland and our military security will not entirely protect us. This was given to the president in February 2009. But as much as Future's work is true, the ignoring of Future's work by policymakers and people in power is also true. So we see that no heed was paid to this, and that is not saying that the attack could have been prevented, but it was anticipated in one sense. Finland is a very small country. You're all aware of it today in the days of mobile phones. Nokia is a Finnish company, and Finland has a very strong presence in work in futures. Finland Center for Futures, FFRC, Finland Futures Research Center at the University of Turku, which is the fourth or fifth largest town, has a turnover of euro 5 million in terms of the consultancy projects that it does on in the field of futures research. And they have also have Finland Futures Academy, and they have a permanent committee of the Parliament of the Future, which has members from all political parties. So some countries are very futuristic in the world. Kuwait did an exercise, and there are a lot of those exercises can be listed. These are just some examples that I want to share. So in terms of the work that futurists do, some is obvious. They often work with clients, which may be governments or corporations, write books and papers, they research on specific issues and sectors. Scenario preparing is the outcome of a lot of their work. A lot of work gets done on the methods of future research. A lot of people are now teaching and also teaching at the age. In some countries, they are now taking this field into the schools and teaching even at the secondary and primary level. Not primary, maybe tertiary and secondary level. And they run take part in national and international organizations and futures workshops and educate the public. Frederick Pollack, he was a Dutch futurist, and he did a lot of, in the 60s and the 70s, he did a lot of work in futures workshops with ordinary people and citizens. And it's also notable that one of the things I didn't mention in the origins, that in the 30s and 40s and 50s when it started, it was linked more to military strategies and defense work and so on. But subsequently, especially the work of WFSF and a lot of other futurists, humorist futurists like Frederick Pollack, the work involves more in terms of sustainable development alternatives, peace research, and things like that. So this is a concluding slide. Thank you. It's gone on much longer than we had expected. This is a quote from Wendell Berry that despite the availability of many futures materials and teaching methods in a long history of the field, despite its many contributions to practical decision making, future studies today remains a neglected subject at all levels of education on every continent and in every country. And this includes US and Europe. Because still in terms of the large number of universities that are there, very few are still doing future studies. And we also say that it's completely ironical that we teach history a lot, but to prepare people for the future, we are not really teaching future studies. So at some levels, it should be part of very basic education for more logical analysis, looking at the future, looking at the tools and methods available, in terms of planning our own personal and social futures. So, thank you. This I leave for the discussion part. I recently made a presentation on this whole aspect what are the forward-looking activities, the economic forward-looking activities in India, and what is India doing on these, how they relate to the challenges in India facing. But we'll keep this discussion. Thank you. Thanks a lot for your.
Thank you, Mr. Kapoor, for your wonderful presentation. I think we have now better grasp of what is research studies. So I was personally happy to know that some of the people whom I thought are for sociologists are very much into future studies. So future studies and sociology are some sort of kinship relationship. So that's definitely something to be happy about. And I also like this idea of belief, of trust in human action to change society. But we sociologists are also notorious to emphasize and highlight what we call social structure, power structure. So how they interact, I think that could be an interesting topic, and I hope that issue will come up when we discuss these issues shortly. So now the floor is open for questions and discussions. Please.
So I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, but the impression I got about the future studies, these might be.
I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, but the impression that I got about this future studies is that it talks about future more in terms of development discourses and its implications. Is there any space and room for these conflict studies? Because to be a holistic discipline, it needs to take into account the holistic discourses apart from this economic discourse. And what I got from this presentation is it's more about these economic discourses.
Okay, so I'm sorry that must have been my limitation or the limitation of time in trying to encapsulate a whole field for you in 45 minutes. No, it's not that it does not look at. In fact, I told you that Harman Khan, who came from RAND and one of the most, I have not mentioned number of people, there was no time in space to mention people. He did a book on nuclear war and the fallout of nuclear war in mutually assured destruction scenarios, and what will happen if 10 million or 20 million Americans die in nuclear war. So conflict studies is very much, you see, futures does not restrict any futurist or any scholar by saying that we are only going to talk about development and so on. I took those examples because in terms of sustainability and environmental concerns, a lot of that is happening in the developed countries. A lot of work is happening on educational futures, on pedagogies for education, the right pedagogies and integral futures, holistic futures. So conflict and this whole question of migration, and these are all very central concerns. And it's a question of, see, at one point, at one level, it's an emerging field. I call it a perspective. It's like, you can look at anything in social sciences these days from the gender perspective. So you can look at anything in the social sciences these days from the futures perspective. So absolutely, war, because a lot of I told you, the earlier work was in fact on war and military strategies. And then the civil society, so to say, the peace researchers and the social scientists and others who wanted to talk more from the point of view of positive things. And that is why those kinds of elements came in. But when you talk about peace research, you obviously talk of mitigating and overcoming conflicts. Also, yes, so a lot of futurists have done work on, and in fact, what would be an interesting work would be, very practically speaking, one of the points I did not mention, I want to come on that when we talk of India and South Asia. What are some of the big questions for futures in the next 2 years, and what is the work that people in India and South Asia can do? Look at, for instance, the geopolitics of the continent. Look at the India-Pakistan conflict and so on, and come up with alternative scenarios. That is, very strongly futures work.
Sir, in the first slide, there is a mention of Techno-Brahmins, the future of communications, 1977, in the first slide. In what sense is the Techno-Brahmin, the word Brahmin is used?
See, that's my creation, so I can tell you. I made a conceptualization. This paper was written in 97. So I made a conceptualization, a scenario for 2100, where because of the evolutions in technology and genetic engineering and stuff like that, we will have a society stratified by access to technology. So I use the analogy of the caste system, the top of the.
I think then your own slide, your statement is contradictory. In the first paragraph, you are saying that it should be without poverty, deprivation, discrimination, hatred, and war. And other side, you are using the word Brahmin. It means that when you are talking about satisfaction, it means you are not talking about Hindus and not talking about Buddhists, Sikh, and Muslims.
Okay, let me just answer that. It's pretty simple to answer that. When one is using the term,
only the Brahmins cannot be technocrat. Other people also have good educations.
Let me respond to this. I get your point. See, two things here. One, if you notice, I said that we talk of possible, probable, and preferable futures. So, in fact, the whole idea of doing that paper and talking of Techno-Brahmins is to come up with a scenario which ought not to be. So it's talking of, when I presented those two scenarios in the paper, it was talking of the possible or the probable futures, not the preferable future.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that is, please let me complete. So I'm not saying that is the preferable future. And the second thing, just because one uses a term, this is I use the term in the sense of Max Weber's concept of the ideal time. So it is a term for a construct. And one can use any term. One can call them, as zombies and idiots and nothing else. One can call them ABCD. One can call them anything. So I prefer to emphasize the element of social stratification. Just to emphasize that there will be social stratification is likely to be in view of how technology access is going without democratizing society, without equality in society, without access to technology and the internet and so on, and anticipating what will happen, much more will happen on this in the next 100 years, we may end up with a scenario where we have a stratification. I have simply used the term Techno-Brahmins for it without, the term does not imply any value implications.
This word should be replaced by context. I think it should be appropriate the word over there, because it will not have any conflict.
You see, okay, now it's important to respond here for you to understand. We just said, I come to this whole debate of whether it's a science or an art. See, in science, you're talking about facts. In art, and that is why I also take the position that it is both science and art. Because in art you're doing creative expression. When a painter makes a painting in a particular way, you don't tell the painter that you should not have made it like this, you make it like this. So it's the person who's preparing to construct a vision, a scenario, has a freedom to choose his language, what the scenario is and what the words are. I mean, you make a scenario and you are welcome to use the term, but I made a scenario and I use the term Techno-Brahmins. So there is nothing wrong or right about it. It's just a description for a construct. What we need to understand is what the construct is. Incidentally, this paper and some of my other papers are available on, I mentioned to you that Futures is a paid journal, not easy to access. But my papers are all available on our website called alternativefutures.org, which is mentioned there on the title page. And from there you can easily download and read those papers.
One is that I found that the students could not imagine a future which was not highly dominated by technology. So if you ask them the question, what's going to happen to the informal sector, they didn't really have this, what didn't really exist in their imagination, because informality of that kind of human
driven activity, they couldn't actually imagine a future with it. But at the same time, there was a peculiar situation where they couldn't imagine that anybody would have control over this technology. So
They couldn't imagine.
no, it was highly centralized control. So it was a very kind of dystopic vision for us, where the world only consisted of machines. All labor was done by machines, and all the control over the labor was elsewhere. It was not something that they themselves thought that they would ever have. You know, it was just too large or too big. And I'm just wondering if this is a kind of thing, or how you would address that kind of thing in a discipline that is, I guess, scientifically based. How would you address these kinds of imaginaries that, at least this, I'm sorry imagining that I have, but it seems this younger generation is dominating the conversation.
Yeah, very relevant question, and that I said some of the big areas for the future. That is one of the big areas for the future, because you mentioned one kind of technology. Now look at the whole question of genetic engineering. I mean, I don't know what all technologies they mentioned, because these days.
Urban studies class, so it was all about transport of humans in a cities that
Absolutely.
form of buildings.
So it is a social fact that with the modern generation, younger generation going with what they have seen of technology, their imagination is limited to only imagining certain scenarios where technology is dominant. But so that is why it needs a creative younger person or somebody else to come up with a scenario where it is different. Also, there is more thing about how technology, whether it's ICTs, how about genetic engineering? When you enter into the field, and you are going to face those questions. The UK is already, I read a report a month ago, the UK is already going to permit genetic engineering for babies. So you're going to have, in a few decades from now, that was one of those things in the scenario for dystopic scenario for 2001, or much later, you're going to have a situation, and that will perpetuate inequality in ways that social scientists have not thought of. You're going to have designer babies, which some, the rich, will have the capacity to do, and the others will not. So that will throw up ethical questions, that will throw up political questions, that will throw up questions of social stratification. The same, what you're saying about, I agree with you that the modern imagination, the imagination of younger people, especially the architecture students, is more into, that how people already say that Google has already tested the driverless car, and all those things are there. So there is and that's the kind of thing that also the World Future Society people, the American futurists fascinated with technology are often talking about. So in terms of how to get out of that vision, I mean, I think you have to, the people in the social sciences, in architecture, in sociology, in also fields like art and media, have to show them what the implications of that can be. Or to some extent, the movies like The Matrix and The Matrix Reloaded are about those scenarios where everything is controlled by technologies. So once you see all the novels of Michael Crichton, Next, and other ones on how technology is going to create, is going to control human beings in such a big way. So part of I would say that in future studies, what you're trying to really do is hold up a mirror to society and say that, this is, hey, listen, this is where you're going. So if you have visions where you can say what the dystopic effects of that technology control will be, that's the creative bit, that's the...
But that is the strange thing about it, is that they themselves were aware that there was a dystopic and their vision was dystopic, but they couldn't imagine the outside of it. They couldn't imagine a vision that was not entirely. They understood that there was something very scary about it. But they couldn't imagine a situation which was not entirely technologized and where that technology was not entirely dominated by large corporations. I mean, one can argue against it.
No, so I agree. That's what I'm saying. The challenge is for someone to come up with answers to the questions, or to see that how that alternative, where technology is centrally controlled, technology is not going to be dominant, is possible. So I can understand that architecture students will not be able. I would expect this. Like they say, one of the predictions that people in the ICTs field make, they say something as big as Google is going to come up, and it's going to come up from India or South Asia or something. That's a clear prediction which has been made by a number of scholars in the field of ICTs. Now, what that is, we don't know. That's something. But what it is, of course, we have this thing in the economy about the entrepreneurs and new types of economic activities. And look at Flipkart, for instance. Something a company started 5 or 6 years ago, and the way it has taken on that space. So, what I'm saying is, it poses a challenge. What you're really saying is you are giving a pointer to a question which is a big challenge. Can we imagine a scenario where technology is not going to be done? So that's a challenge for you and for me. We need to come up with those scenarios. And even more so, I think the artists and the storytellers and the political scientists and the human rights people and the educators and the philosophers, they need to come up with these things.
The basic question, I have the problem with the word exploring futures in the title. I think that is for me it sounds like a structuring future. Like it's all, I believe, and that our present is not free. It's been structured, not by me, not by you, it's from others. And the world which is structuring our present is also attempting to structure our future also. So it's all, again, it's coming from the whole notion of that exploring future. It's coming from US or the West. It's not, I haven't heard, and you mentioned that it has emerged from some third world country, and like it's kind of forcing that, okay, now we have the structure. It comes to me like, now we have structured your present, now it's time to your future also. This is capturing the future also. So in this way, I see this in this way.
I can only see that if you're reading more into the lines than you should, that to some extent the issue of how the internet controlled by certain corporations in the West, or to some extent the whole question of dominating the categories of knowledge is there. But I don't think the term exploring futures itself conveys that. And in fact, you explore, when you use the word explore, you have the notion of open space. You explore space. You explore something that is open. And I think in some of the shared assumptions and methods of future studies I have mentioned, that Gary mentioned and futurists mentioned, and I have put that there, that the future is an open field, open to human action. Now, what you say in terms of everything being structured by forces outside of you. You know about Margaret Mead? You heard about Margaret Mead, famous anthropologist. The most famous quote, it may have been quoted thousands of times. I quoted it also in one of my papers 2 years ago. I read an issue. In fact, you must see that particular issue called Transformative Initiatives. And I have the introduction to that, which is a very substantive introduction written up, and it's available on the website, the introduction to the special issue on Transformative Initiatives. It exactly deals with this question of agency, of structuring and what human beings can do. Futurists believe that human beings can change things. Margaret Mead, whose quote I use in that paper, says, never doubt that a small, I don't know exact words, but I'm conveying it to the thrust of the quote. Never doubt that a small group of human beings can change the world they always have. So what futurists say is, there are always activists, it has an activist orientation. It doesn't say that, that forces are structuring the world in a particular way, so we can't do anything and we'll fold our hands and lie back. No, what it says is that you are free to imagine another future and you are free to work towards it. For instance, everybody talks about how the capitalist forces are dominant. Now, there are also a huge number of efforts trying to think of an alternative to capitalism, or trying to think of capitalism with alternative features. You have this book by Rajni Bakshi, just came out 2 years ago, Penguin book. It documents, it's a fat book, 350 pages. It documents alternative economics throughout the world. What are these whole protests in the US and Europe that recently took place? What was it called? The Occupy. It is people who do not want to participate in that capitalist structure. So one can have a defeatist attitude, which would not be a very futurist, action-oriented attitude, saying that everything is structured. You see, let me give you a personal example. Let me put it in another way. From my batch in school, everybody who came out is either a doctor or in the IT sector or in business. I am the only person who chose this field. Why? Because as I told you, I consider myself an intuitive futurist. Because I thought the thinking was it went like this. When I took up sociology, the thinking was in order to change something, you need to know how it works. I think that's what they say also about how that's a comment also from Tokyo, one of the founders. Same with future studies. If you anticipate what's going to happen, you can try to control those forces. So I would say that that's the whole concept that even my research group, Alternative Futures, we try to present alternatives to what is the mainstream approach. For instance, one of our current projects is a climate change adaptation. Because if you just say that everything is structured and you can't find these forces, you just abandon all hope. But there is a way to hope. But first, you have to use knowledge, you have to use the methods. You see, one of the things problems I find with people, social scientists and others, there's a term used by this psychiatrist and author, superb author, one of my favorite authors, called M. Scott Peck. He has books called The Road Less Traveled and other books. And he uses a term called the map of reality. We have to constantly update our maps of reality. One of the problems I find with social scientists, with bureaucrats, with people working in different fields, not just social scientists and bureaucrats, many people, is that they are not able to update their maps of reality. They do not have relevant information about how the world is changing. So one of the most important things, I spend a large amount of time every day of my life trying to find out what's happening in different parts of the world, how society is changing. Because unless you know the forces at work, how can you grapple with them? How can you suggest alternatives? So, as about the title, I don't agree with you that exploring conveys the notion of structure. How can exploring convey a notion of structure?
No, sir. While you talk about destruction, it also contains what knowledge we have. How can we be so sure that what knowledge we have, it's not being, it's very free, it's value free, or it's very kind of as knowledge in the quote unquote ideal type should be there. It has what comes to us. It's also somehow it has been tampered, and it has been tampered with the very kind of who is the power relation. It also comes here.
No, but tell me something. How do you deal with this? For instance, if I were to ask you, then okay, this is how it is. How do you deal with it?
That's what we want to look at.
So my suggestion is that you deal with it. That is why I often tell my colleagues and friends from the West, I say the challenge for us is double. Because we have to know your epistemology and we have to know our epistemology, and then we have to...
Then the discourse of knowledge should be changed.
Yes, it has to be changed. And that is how, you see, that is the point. That my friend and this editor of, now he's known as the consulting editor of Futures, Jayamatin Sarkar, we've had these discussions that you see, in the futures field also, in lot of the discourse, if you do not have voices from these countries, how do you come up with knowledge or categories of knowledge or ideas or notions from here? You will only have whatever they say. Now, and this reflects it in very pragmatic terms also. let me share with you something that is happening in our federation about this. We have fees which is standard across the world. And for 3 years now, I've been finding that why should we have a fees which is standard across the world? The fees should be linked to the earning capacities in different parts of the world. And now we are going to change that. So, the fact is that definitely whoever comes from whichever background, the person who comes from the West will only think from, the problems he or she is facing. So, we need a much bigger presence. One of the problems I've said we had with organizations like WFSL, with the Future Student, we have very few voices from countries like India or China. India and China together are 1/3 of the global population. But if you look at membership, we have about 6 members out of 250 members. So, you need to have voices from these countries, but those voices have to be capable to understand, what the rest is saying and what is the problem with their knowledge categories, and then to question. So you have to dig deep. To build high, you have to dig deep. So you have to examine their categories, where they come from, what are the problems with them, and then critique them. And then from critique move to alternatives that you can suggest. So it's a tough task, and that is why it also doesn't happen very easy.
So my question is basically related to this public policy, because I think they are also futurists because they made a plan for us. So in India, IGNOU offers MA course in future policy, public policy planning, but the eligibility, you must be IAS officer to enroll in that course. So my question is, if they made planning, that's quite good. It's look very fancy also. But when coming to the reality, these things are not translated into reality, and nobody think on this. So how you actually plan very good thing for the society, but they are not actually translated to society. How you tackle this type of things?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question. You're saying that those resources are available.
Yeah, our vision is very good. We have our millennium goals, so many things. But due to this many type of things like bureaucracy and all these things, if 100 paisa is coming from the society, that's like 95% is wasting, 5% is going to the company. So my point is that how this this policy is translating into reality, that is in society.
See, the problem you have mentioned is that bureaucracy playing a negative role in society. We are very familiar with that in India. And I can only say that, if you ask me, there are 2 ways of dealing with that. I've often thought of creating a network of honest bureaucrats. I'm not a bureaucrat, but I have some friends in the bureaucracy. There is a need, and there are instances. A few years ago, the bureaucrats and IAS officers in UP got together. The IAS officers in UP, mind you, got together and named 3 of the most corrupt IAS officers in UP. It was not done by anybody outside, it was done by them only. So, there are forces within the bureaucracy also which are positive. But yes, most often what happens is that the bureaucrat will most often tend to go for the status quo. And we also see that, you see so many things in real life. Recently, I met a bureaucrat in Bihar, a very senior bureaucrat, also from my college, some years later. And outside his room had about 100 tube lights. He was wasting so much energy. Literally 100 tube lights on. And outside his room, I could see a tap which was flowing all the time. Just flowing all the time. So I asked the chowkidar there, I said, "Isko theek kyun nahi karate?" So he said, "Pata hai sir, sabko pata hai." Now I wanted to go back to the bureaucrat and tell him, that you talk very big things, but this bloody tap outside your room has been flowing for 3 days. You're wasting so much water. And he and everybody else, he's a principal secretary level officer in Bihar government, and there are so many others. They're all seeing it and they're letting it happen. So, this is about, I do not know, he's not a futurist, this guy. I can only say that. But he's not an environmentalist. He talks very big things. But as to how to deal with it, see, there are now efforts like Transparency International. there is something called best practices all over the world. Part of the social innovations and public policy innovations that there is a big field, emerging field in the future, public policy. Because people realize that just through public policy you can, and there are big debates about it, not just in India, there are big disagreements about it. In the whole US election, you must have seen the big debates about Obama's health policy. Now it's a policy which is meant to be more inclusive. Because otherwise the situation in US before this health policy was there's a carpenter, he knocks off 3 of his fingers and he goes to the hospital and they are told your insurance or you don't have insurance, you can only pay for joining one finger, you won't join the other finger. The situation is as bad. And it's worse than it is in India. But there are big debates. There are still people who leave on the other things. There are the US and the tax structure where, why I'm talking about US, these are problems not just with the bureaucracy, not just in India, it's everywhere. They have a tax structure where the rich guy pays 15%, but the middle class guy pays 30% tax. They do it because that's their attitude, there are problems with it. So the whole future field, in fact, I also did very early, and that paper is part of the knowledge base of future studies put together by G. Sawyer. It's called Future as Fantasy, forgetting the clause. It is a 9-point critique of future studies and analysis practice or dominant social science and analysis practice. Raising some of the same issues, but as I said, things also change. In the West, it's becoming more democratic. The futures field also needs to become, in terms of knowledge categories and what we can say in participation from people in parts of the world, it should become more democratic. Same applies to government. We need to deepen democracy. And India is the biggest democracy in the world by numbers. But if you look at the substance and content of the democracy, there is no. So there is a lot of work within futures also on democracy. And some of the best people who, there's a person for instance who works on social economic democracy. And he has a thesis. You must have seen comments in India about now, the private sector salaries. Ridiculously high salaries in a poor country, you have people earning a few crore rupees every year. So this gentleman from the US, I think George, even something his name, I forget his name. He has a proposal that in social economic democracy you have to have an upper limit on salaries and income. Now it's up to people, those societies to take up those proposals. If they take up those proposals, it's same in India. There are a lot of. That is why one of the things we do in one of our initiatives in Alternate Futures is to document positive initiatives to change. Because a lot of people have done a lot of positive initiatives, but those don't get the kind of press they get forgotten. A lot of things to deal with, and even some government officers have done. There was a person in Madhya Pradesh who has changed the manner in which the ordinary public can access public health services, and he's done fantastic work. He's done the Nobel Prize. So, policy innovation, social innovations, administrative innovations can be done.
Thank you very much for your presentation and also clarifying actually to a great extent when you sort of deal with future studies. I remember considering that was actually something saying that actually a lot of the innovations of what was at one time future innovations did not come from science fiction, came from Jules Verne, the science fiction writer. So, what I find fascinating about this field is that it's actually something that exceeds a lot of academic finance in that sense. So where we sort of start to think it must be quite exciting to see it's something you can't really quite bring into an institution. What I'm sort of interested is, nevertheless, is this notion of the future. You have future studies, but there is this notion of the future that people have in everyday life. Whether we call it shows whatever we use it. And I'm sort of thinking, I think this is one of the first questions that came up about, say, the breakfast of conflict zones there. And so you have a lot of academics writing about communities hit by conflict, and one of the things they often say is that, well, one particular scholar, Valentine Daniel, does the distinction between past, present, and future as a kind of triad to understand the experience of violence. And what the promise is the present, which is the moment, the moment when violence takes place, can often rework the way you look at the past, and you can't think about the future because you're too busy surviving the present. And I think this is sort of concern that comes in at one side. Or then if I look at, say, futures in the way we see them implemented in finance, so these kind of financial instruments, which have been used for speculation, and we've seen what a wonderful job they've done initiating recession and some severe economic hardship in recent years. So there is a notion of the future that also exists in the public, in our language, in everyday usage, and in the way a lot of the kind of cosmologies we enact in everyday life. The communities do that. And it's also tied to this idea of uncertainty and risk. And I was wondering how future studies deals with these sort of concerns.
Questions of uncertainty.
Uncertainty and risk in the context of everyday life. Be it in what we understand as normal life, or even in areas like conflict or financial markets, where you do think about it.
See, the field has generally evolved. I'll just tell you, there are different ways because there are different practitioners. And if you understand that it's both a science and an art, which means in terms of art, people can come up with different creations and very creative ways of doing things. But in terms of how the field has generally evolved, is that chaos and complexity and risk and uncertainty. And that also reminds me, and it's a very important point, that Eric Ulrich, Risk Society. A lot of work in sociology is being done also now on Risk Society, postmodernism, and after that now Risk Society. And it's all coming from sociologists. So the dominant, the major view is that earlier there was when the field began, when I was younger, there was more emphasis on prediction, uncertainties, and so on. For instance, when Rostov, he had this theory of takeoff by developing countries, 4 or 5 stages, and models, and so on. Now, more and more futurists say that the fact that we study the future, which is a profession, and try to create another future, does not mean that the future is certain or that we are very well aware of what it is. A greater degree of uncertainty, at least, is accepted. And as far as risk is concerned, see, it's a real social trend. She mentioned something about how the people cannot have, the students may only have images of where technology, dystopic image, where technology is going to control a lot of things. Similarly, in terms of risk society, and this is I'm talking of Eric Ulrich's formulation, and the others who have been working on these lines, that to some extent modern society, with nuclear plants, with the impacts of climate change, with the ICTs, computers and stolen passwords, they're all living with a greater degree of risk. I imagine that now they're talking in Delhi of building, skyscrapers, so many stories, and some of these buildings, Delhi, for instance, is a earthquake-prone zone 4, and most of our buildings today, I don't think are adequate measures to do that, to counter an earthquake, a really serious earthquake happens. And I can only see it as a practical futurist. When a friend of mine said that I want to buy a flat in East Delhi, I had to say, please don't. Because you are just next to the Yamuna, you are sitting on clay soil, and if an earthquake comes, those buildings will first to come down. So don't invest. So some of the questions of dealing with risk and uncertainty is being aware of things. And one of the biggest issues is that, for instance, a very specific example. Look at BT Grid job. Now, there are, the science is very difficult to, which side one is on. It's very difficult because there are both advocates. There are people who are saying it's accepted in the US, so why can't you accept it in India? There are people who are saying no, it's, and even at the level of ministers, even the scientific committee has, some people are for it, some people are against it. So it is let us assume that their decision, they take a wrong decision and they are wrong. I'm not for it, I'm not against it, because I don't know the science enough to say that what is correct as far as BT measure or genetically modified crops are concerned. Something else that is, for instance, organic farming. I'm 100% for it, because I know that it works, and the whole thing that it will not go enough crops and etc. is more of a sham. it can work. If followed properly, it can give you almost as the same yield that, and a more sustainable yield than the other kind of grain evolution crops can. But GM crops, no, so there is a certain amount of risk involved. There is a certain amount of risk involved with, to take a different example now, the nuclear plants in Japan. So after the current Fukuyama disaster, they are now saying they are almost winding up in nuclear, but there is a cost. Same with India, because somewhere if you need to have other sources of energy, so you have to, the question that society has to decide through its experts and through its public and through wider knowledge dissemination is what is the acceptable level of risk. There is always an acceptable level of risk. If I go out, if I drive on the road in Delhi, I have a greater risk of dying in a car crash than I have if I fly. The risk. So some of these obvious facts are also not known to people. They say that if you look at it, if you go to if you take your vehicle outside Delhi to a destination 200 kilometers from Delhi, I mean the rate of road accidents in India is so high. So in terms of, I want to address the fees. Then in terms of one of the issues that I want to work on is road safety in India. Because it's pathetic, it's the worst rate in the world. The maximum number of people, there are more people in India who die in road accidents than who die of, let us say, cancer or something. So it's, and even for cancer, there are the public right public policies. You promote certain things, they will lead to cancer. You don't promote certain things, they won't lead to cancer. So, you will have, let me give you a third example, terrorism. One of the things they use for ammonium nitrate, and it's freely available. And the government committee meets for 5 years, and in 5 years also they can't do anything to ban it. It's still freely available. And it's one of the most common components used in bombs by terrorists. So it's once the public is aware, once somebody is aware, he or she can campaign for the right. That's called public policy advocacy today. It's an emerging field. And we also want to get more into it, because otherwise the government will not listen. And you write so many articles in the paper, you have to work with the government to try to convince them to do certain things. So in terms of coming back to your question, on very relevant question, so it's, to some extent, risk is always there. A society has to accept, has to decide its acceptable level of risk. And generally speaking, futurists are now more acceptable of greater uncertainty because of more inconvenience. I mean, also because the way modern society functions, there is, because of so many different factors, greater uncertainty. I mean, even sometimes it's also created by human beings. So climate change is partly created by industrialization, more industrialization, carbon emissions, and that's partly leading to the kind of additional and more violent storms and floods as of the kind that has happened yesterday, I think Sandy, in the US. So it's partly a human creation. So it all links to public policy. If my wife was commenting, she was saying probably the candidates for the US election now, after this storm, might realize a little more the importance of climate change. They take some action. So uncertainty and risk are, and not just futurists, even in the major social sciences, it has been recognized that modern society is risk society.
Okay, so any question? Okay, thank you, Mr. Kapoor, for accepting our invitation and coming all the way to South Asian University. So it was a wonderful interaction and discussion. And also, I would like to thank all the participants for your rapt attention and your questions and your participation. So tea and snacks are waiting outside. So we'll have tea and snacks and maybe we'll continue this discussion. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much. It was really a wonderful opportunity, and it's also notable. It's historical because this is one of the first talks on future studies in India. So you made history.